Okay, so it's always a popular one. So yeah, I mean, obviously we have to go there, but it is in some ways it's a bit challenging. But of course, the basic point, is that it's there. Like, was it Sir John Hunt said about Mount Everest? you know, they asked him why he thought it was necessary to climb Mount Everest, and he said because it's there. And it's kind of like that, isn't it? We have to come to terms with suffering because it's there. And in a way, that's really the whole sort of pivot point of the Buddhist path, isn't it? It is a response to the fact of suffering. That's where it all starts, and that's the first noble truth. So just give a bit of time for any responses to that meditation and this topic. And I sent it out, the portion of text before, which Con, you didn't get, but some of the others have had this section from the text. So as I said at the beginning, this text combines the two main systems of Sutrayana meditation, the Lojong mind training and the Lamrim. So this is very important in the Lamrim, is meditation on the sufferings, specifically the sufferings of the lower realms. But I find it more useful to kind of combine them, suffering generally. But we can explore that question because the questions often come up, well, what's the point of meditating on the sufferings of the hells? It doesn't seem very real, or it doesn't seem, very beneficial. But we'll look at that. But any thoughts before I start to go through the text? David?
My thoughts. I think the meditations on death awareness are one thing, but the meditations on the fears of a future rebirth in a lower realm is another. Like the text, he goes into such detail about the hell realms that it's horrific, isn't it? Frankly, and I think a lot of people, me including, do find it hard to even think about it. I mean, it's so disturbing, I find.
Yes. Yeah.
That to actually just to meditate on it might be just too much, a step too far. That's my personal opinion.
Right.
I'm not denying the existence.
I understand. Yeah.
But no, but to actually bring yourself to actually meditate on these things, it's very difficult.
Yes. Yeah, it can be, David. I remember my first teacher, John Marshall, back in 1981 or so, talking about it, because he was actually, along with I think Glenn Mullen and some of these other great translators, he studied at the he was part of the translation bureau at the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives. And so, he actually met with the Dalai Lama a few times, and the Dalai Lama asked him about this. He said, how do you find meditating on the hell realms? And John said, well, I find it pretty difficult. And the Dalai Lama said, yeah, I do too. I meditate on human suffering. So you've got a good, a good example there. And I'm not really sure. I'm not sure what I think about it. I mean, I think you've raised a good point there, because one of the, things that people say about why it doesn't seem real, why are we imagining these terrible realms of suffering? And as I say, that is one question. And the question of if they do exist, should we be meditating on them is another question, isn't it? And we will kind of have a look at that first question. Is it realistic that these things exist, or is this just some kind of horror story that's told to terrify us? Is it just imagination? Well, I'm not sure, and we'll look at that. But if they do exist, why should we meditate, or should we meditate on them? I think one thing to bear in mind here is that, these teachings, if you put them in their context of this, we're talking 15th century Tibet, that the purpose of the teachings, like the meditation on the hell realms and so on, is to bring people into at least a basic level of practice where they are striving to stop very negative actions, And when the Dharma first came to Tibet, there was plenty of that going on. And I imagine in the 15th century, there was still plenty of it going on. And, it's a different context in the West, because anybody, or pretty well anybody who's coming into these teachings now in this sort of situation that we're in, is already quite far on in their, being interested in spiritual practice and moving away from those kind of very negative actions. Whereas here it's like, it's aimed at people who may be quite unsophisticated. It's not kind of like here, it's a self-selecting group of people with an interest in spirituality, isn't it? Whereas there, it's like people who may be living quite negative lives, to begin to bring them round to a more positive way of living. So, for example, when Artisha first came, I think it was Artisha. But anyway, some of the early lamas, they would give refuge, and instead of taking the 5 lay precepts, a lot of people would just take one precept, which was to not kill human beings. That was pretty advanced for them, because a lot of them they were living by brigandage. That was their livelihood. So bringing them to the Dharma is actually starting at that level. Whereas for us, it's not really, how likely we are to be doing those kind of actions is, I hope, that's not where we're coming into the picture from. So I think that's to be borne in mind, David. And for me, I do think that meditating on the sufferings of the hells are very important, but I would connect it more with meditating on compassion, rather than seriously believing that you or I are at risk of going there next time. I don't think that's really true. And Lama Yeshe said that very openly. He said, you guys aren't going to the hell realms, how useful it is then to think about that in terms of our own motivation, I'm not sure. I was having the thought, actually, possibly while we were doing the meditation, but anyway, yeah, I think it was, you could look at it in this way. Think about the sufferings you've experienced in this life. Would you want to experience them again? Because when I think about that, the answer is very clear, no. I don't want to go through the sufferings, even the ones which are relatively small. I don't want to repeat those sufferings the next time. So we can look at it in that way, that there are things there are experiences that might happen to us if we do come back, or we're kind of still exploring that question. But if that's true, there's a lot of experiences that we would want to avoid, isn't there? So I think rather than trying to get a sense of, oh, I might be in a hell realm next time, I don't know how much traction that gets, because most of us haven't done the kind of things that lead to that rebirth. And at least in this life, we don't know. There might be seeds from before, I don't know. But in general, Milarepa said, I'm not scared of death, but I am scared of rebirth. And there's reason to be. we don't want to come back and have to, I don't want to have to go back and go through the ordinary sufferings of being a human child. Actually, they were not much fun. Not terrible, not like the hell realms. But yes, Anne, please, yeah.
Could you say something about hungry ghosts? Because I always think that's probably our biggest danger, because we just so, you know, want stuff, don't we? And that's really a mindset that's endemic, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
I always see this as our biggest danger.
I think that's a good place to start, Anne, because, you know, these days, sort of in our culture, believing in hell realms is a bit kind of unfashionable, isn't it? But a lot of people have experiences that make them think maybe, you know, people who have the idea of the hungry ghost karma is like, if you're, particularly if you're very attached to a certain place, then you may, you know, come after death, you may come back as a spirit and inhabit that place for a long time. And there are a lot of stories that have quite a powerful sort of, you know, sense of reality to them, aren't there, about that somebody who had a very, very strong relationship with a certain place, and many kind of, you know, powerful things happen, and they come back and they kind of, you know, they're haunting that place. They can't leave it. They're stuck there. That's a kind of example that I think a lot of people in our culture maybe can relate to. Maybe even some have had experiences of somebody that they knew, you know, who seems to be still around. And I think that, you know, does have some credibility to it. So if we do have that very strong attachment that we can't let go of something or someone or somewhere, that we really identify so strongly with that, and we I mean, it's a lower rebirth, so it is connected to negative actions, you know, that attachment would have to motivate actual negative actions. But I think about, you know, some of these, there was, what's the man's name? He was the richest man in Britain. He was the owner of the Tetra Pak company, Swedish man. And there was a big article about him in the Guardian that he paid something like, you know, he's a multi-billionaire, and he paid something like £2,000 in income tax. So this was a miser. This was somebody who, you know, was totally fixated on money. And it was a very tragic story, because him and his wife were found dead, you know, in their home, and it was really terrible situation. Yeah, what's his name? That the other billionaire, Howard Hughes. Similar story, you know, people who are very, very attached to wealth can end up in extremely intense misery, and you know, leading a very negative life of meanness when they could obviously help a lot of people, and they can't let go of this money, a fixation that they have. So extreme attachment, you can really see that is leading people down a very negative karmic path. So these things are real, you know. We can see them within this life, how very, very strong attachment or strong hatred can create intense suffering for people. And we think, well, if they're continuing into another life with that same kind of mind, they're going to be heading into more and more suffering. So in that way, I find, you know, that it becomes more real to me, rather than thinking about, you know, these very vivid descriptions of the hell realms, which we know that they're kind of not sort of I mean, for Tibetans in the 15th century, they could believe, 800 miles below the earth, there's this fiery pit where people are, but for us, we know it's not really like that. But what we can see is the universality of karma itself, how the relationship between our state of mind, the actions that gives rise to, and the experiences that come from that. We can see that in this life, and then logically, if the mind does continue, then those same tendencies are going to continue and create more and more suffering. So that principle, it's kind of like if we think, well, at death we just finish. It's like we get a get out of jail free card, don't we? But I'm not sure that we do. If we don't, then we need to watch out, don't we? We need to watch out that our mind doesn't get taken over by these kind of strong karmic forces of attachment and hatred and and wrong view is another one. I think things like religious fanaticism, that is what I think of as a big example of wrong view, that people through this very intense conviction in something that when you look at it doesn't really have a sound logical basis, some forms of religious extremism, people are intensely convinced of the truth of these beliefs. But when you ask them, well, what's the evidence or the reasoning? All you find is, well, they've been told that they're true. And then they act on those beliefs and often do very negative things. In a way, the motivation's good, it's a religious motivation, but because the mind, the belief, the view is distorted, then they may be creating extremely negative actions, religious hatred and fanaticism, probably one of the most dangerous, one of the most negative things, So these are very real states of mind that people do get into. Whether anybody in this particular group is how big a risk are we at of actually falling into those states? Well, maybe, not so big now, but it can happen. It can happen that people turn to the Dharma and then they lose it, fall away from it, and the mind can get very wrapped up in negative stuff. So I don't think we've got, an absolute guarantee, although it is very clearly said in the Dharma teachings, if you maintain refuge in the three jewels, you will not experience rebirth in a lower realm. But when we think about, and then that's going to be the next topic, is refuge. So we'll look at what that means, because when we look at what it really means to maintain refuge in the three jewels, it does mean, that we abandon harming others, really. That's the main point, isn't it? If we are continuing to harm others, that is going to harm our mind on a deep level. Right. And I don't mean occasional slip-ups where you say something a bit harsh without, I don't mean that. Because we say those things and then we purify, don't we? We think we have regret, then, that isn't going to take us to the hell realms. But if we don't control those tendencies at all, then they will build up, they will get stronger. And then we can begin to be, more at risk of a karmic problem. So I don't know, is there any of that helpful? Does anybody have any more thoughts to offer? Well, as I said, I think if we look deeply at these traditional teachings, we can connect with, there is a universal reality that they're trying to speak about, and they're coming from a different cultural and historical context, but there's very deep wisdom there.
David, can I ask a question? It's a little bit on the tangent, but
sure.
I've been keep meaning to ask it. In the prayer, is it at the beginning or the end? Maybe both. We talk about the three jewels as Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly.
Right.
Supreme assembly is something new to me, because I've always encountered it as the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha.
It is just a translation. By the way, you've still got the problem with the sound, Sinjan. I don't know what it is.
Sugar. Oh,
Yeah,
nice.
yeah, it suddenly goes very quiet and then it comes back to full volume. I don't know what's happening there. Anyway, yeah, I'll respond to that. So yeah, it's just a translation of Sangha actually, but the connotation, Supreme Assembly, when we'll talk about this next time, but just sort of sneak preview. When we talk about taking refuge in the Sangha as one of the three jewels, so the Sangha jewel specifically refers to those who have reached a level of realization where they're able to perceive emptiness directly. Okay, so that is a path where once you attain that level, that is an irreversible realization. You cannot, from after that, you can't fall back to a samsaric state. You haven't completely, finished the path and transcended all suffering and all misconceptions, but you've reached a stage where you are not going to stray off the path. It's impossible at that point. You are safe. And so anybody who has reached that level, an Arya being, an Arhat or an Arya Bodhisattva level, they are said to be a source of refuge. And that's the Sangha jewel. So when it says Supreme Assembly, it specifically means those. There is also, that's the absolute Sangha. The relative Sangha is, those who have taken the monastic vows, and, monks and nuns. They are the conventional sort of symbol, if you like, of the actual Sangha, which is the Arya beings. Okay.
I also have a question. It's can you hear me okay?
Yes, at the moment I
can. It's going back a bit. It's not about the chapter from this week or the section, but it's just about meditating on death.
Yeah.
I'm finding I'm getting a bit blocked with that.
Okay.
Because I'll start to think about it, and then I start to get concerned that I might die today, and sort of visualizing these horrible ways I might die, and then it kind of turns into a kind of preoccupation, and it not in a beneficial way. It doesn't make me want to practice more. It makes me want to be more careful that I don't die. So I was wondering, do you have any advice on how to get past that?
Well, it's a very important question, that's for sure, Izzy. Yeah.
Can I just jump in there? Sorry.
Yeah, David, yeah.
I was going to ask a similar sort of question, but how does one know if you're doing the meditation correctly on death awareness, and how do you know if you're doing it incorrectly? Right. That was my question.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you both for those questions. And I'm not so sure about whether I would want to talk in terms of doing it right or wrong, but could you say a little bit more about it as well? What is it that you're imagining particularly gruesome ways of dying, or what's going on mentally, and what are the emotions around it?
Sometimes it can be a bit gruesome. I guess it's thinking about. It turns into thinking about, I could fall down the stairs, or I could get hit by a car, and that will come up as I'm doing those things.
Yeah.
Or like I was talking about making some shelves with a friend, and then I started imagining getting drawn into the circular saw, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think
I get that.
It's a bit of a kind of preoccupation, I think, thinking about it in a way that's unhelpful rather than a way that's helpful.
Yeah. And is there a lot of anxiety around that? Is that what it's going?
I think there's some anxiety around it. it doesn't last beyond the thought. It's not like I'm walking around all day feeling anxious, but definitely when I'm having the thought, I feel a bit of anxiety, and then I have to stop thinking about it because I don't know how to get beyond that in a helpful way. I feel like it's just going to spiral into an unhelpful.
You're getting pulled into a very vivid imagination of your own death, and that's quite disturbing. It's not, kind of.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, I suppose what first thing that comes to my mind is, well, the reality is that that's only a thought, isn't it? And, all kinds of thoughts can arise, and they can only really disturb us if we sort of buy into the thought. Do you see what I'm saying? If we can, one of the important aspects of meditation, that one of the ways I think that meditation can be really helpful to us, is that it is partly a training in not identifying with thoughts, isn't it? That when we do just straightforward mindfulness meditation, the idea is to just watch thoughts come and go, and whatever thoughts are coming and going, to remember that we are not, you are not your thoughts. The thought is just something that's happening, and it'll come and it'll go. It's impermanent. And so if we don't have that awareness of it's just a thought, like thoughts come and go like waves on water, then we kind of grasp onto the thought, and then it can affect us in that sort of way. So I mean, I would say probably don't push yourself to, I've got to, even though this is so hard and painful, I've got to meditate on death. Don't have that kind of attitude, but maybe just dip the toe in the water, and if that starts to happen, just experiment with, well, can I just look at that thought as if it was a movie, rather than feeling that this thought is me. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. But I certainly think if you're finding it disturbing, then back off a little bit. This is not about doing things that are going to seriously disturb your mind or upset you. A little bit of it is not a bad thing. A little bit of anxiety about death, is kind of the point, is that we are more liable to be complacent about the possibility of our death and just completely ignore the fact that it is a reality, but at the same time, we don't want to get obsessed by it. That's not helpful. It's a balance. It's a middle way, And yes.
I was just thinking, I don't know whether this is helpful to Izzy, but what seems to be happening is maybe that it's throwing up for her, it's giving her an opportunity to look at what really bothers her. I mean, I think don't get too much in there, but it's it seems to be throwing things up for you, maybe that, and you can then look at them and say, oh yeah, it clarifies what does bother you.
That's true.
And then you then need to look, perhaps then in various ways, is it true? Is it not? Will it happen? And, I don't know how you deal with it from them, but I just think it's giving you a bit of clarity, which can be very useful sometimes, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's right, Anya. And it's an opportunity, as I was saying, to sort of look at it in a slightly more detached way, just observe what's going on in your mind and begin to learn about and wonder about, well, why might that be there? I mean, we don't know, because sometimes these things go quite deep. But if we can sort of bring a kind of gentle, kind mind to it, and a kind of curiosity, sometimes things can come to light, but obviously, you know, if it becomes very disturbing, just you back off a bit. Yeah.
I think that's really helpful. So
okay, great. Thank you. Okay. So, yes, so this section of the text is, I mean, I'm running two things together and they are very closely connected. So we've looked at the first two of the four preliminary practices, the meditating on the precious human rebirth and meditating on death and impermanence. And then this is the next two, meditating on karma, the karmic laws of cause and effect, as it says, and the sufferings. You know, traditionally it's the sufferings of the lower realms, but actually the first Dalai Lama is talking about suffering more generally as well here. So yeah, the reason why the traditional presentation, especially in the Lamrim, is about just the suffering of the lower realms is that the Lamrim has this threefold structure, you know, so the way it's presented is that the first scope, the lowest scope of the Lamrim, is about generating the motivation to avoid a rebirth in the lower realms and ensure a higher rebirth. And then the middle scope is about generating the motivation to get out of samsara altogether and become liberated. And then the highest scope, obviously, is generating motivation to become a Buddha for the sake of others. So that's why, you know, they talk about the sufferings of the lower realms. But here it's more about, because obviously there's a close connection between that first level and the second level. Yes, we want to avoid the rebirth in the animal realm or the hungry ghost realm or the hell realm. We also want to avoid rebirth in a suffering aspect of the human realm, or even in the human realm at all, because there's always suffering there, and even in the higher realms. So, you know, what we're moving to here is that this motivation of renunciation, which I spoke about in the meditation, which is the determination to attain liberation, freedom from samsara, to transcend the sufferings of samsara, and you know, to be free from the causes of suffering as well, the karmic causes of suffering. So, you know, it makes sense that we're looking at the whole spectrum of all these different kinds of suffering. And like I say, I think, you know, when we do look at some of the things that go on in the human world, if there is this relationship between our mental states and actions in this life and the experiences that we have in the next life, then it looks to me that some people are headed for very, very, you know, unfortunate, very unpleasant rebirth indeed. You know, there are people who are creating destruction and suffering on a huge scale, and engaging in extremely negative actions for a variety of motivations. So that kind of leads me into, you know, are these hell realms, are they real? Well, if the law of karma is this, you know, if there's no escape from the law of karma, then I think they have to be real. The reason I think they're real is because they're really, you know, not in the literal way about walls 800 miles thick and stuff like that. It's not about that, but it's about, they are descriptions of possible experiences, right? That's the point. It's possible to imagine states of extremely intense suffering that the mind could experience. So in the Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, they're referred to as the mind-created hells. And that doesn't mean that they're imaginary, you know, because this realm, this state of existence that we're in at the moment is created by the mind. All our experiences are created by the mind. And how we experience this world depends on our state of mind. So some people do experience this world as like a hell. And some people experience it as like a paradise, like a pure land, you know? And the differences depends on the causes that they have created, on whether they've been generating and creating a habit of generating positive or negative states of mind. So if people are creating intensely negative states of mind and negative actions, it follows logically, if the law of karma is, you know, has that kind of fundamental universal application, yes, there are these states of extreme suffering because people are creating the causes to experience that. Right? And I don't mean that anybody here is creating those causes, you know. Yes, yeah.
I'm sorry it's me so much, but there's something there's something that's always bothered me. And I suppose I get it as much as I do get karma, but it still bothers me, is that it's apparently the very last thought that you have, or the last experience as you transition into the bardo. So, you know, that's the bit that gets me really. You know, you can do all you can, and then
then you have extremely bad luck.
Somebody comes in and starts rearranging your behind yourself. For goodness sake, go away. And where are you born? You know.
Yes. Yes.
You know, I find that one really, really hard. I really do.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. I mean, a couple of things to say about that. One is that it might actually help to give these meditations some purchase, because we think, oh, I've been the good boy or a good girl, so I'm not going to go to the hell. I'm just think, well, what if I, you know? So another thing about it is that that state of mind at the moment of death is very strongly conditioned by what has been the dominant mindset during your life. So the probability is very high that if you've been, you know, practicing the Dharma consistently throughout your life, you're probably going to have a positive mind at the moment of death. It's not absolutely certain unless you have reached a high state of realization. So this could be a good motivation, you know, whilst not making us too paranoid, but to think, well, if I want to be really safe, I should practice very intensely so that I get the realizations, and then I can't be reborn in a lower realm. So that might be quite a little, you know, way we can use those things I mean, I do think like that sometimes. Yeah, I do, because I have done negative actions in this life. I can't say, and I've done negative actions. I know that I've done negative actions in previous lives because I have that tendency in this life. So am I sure that I've purified them all? I'm not sure. One of them could ripen at the time that I die. I hope that by now, you know, the predominant tendencies are the positive ones. But like I say, if we want a real guarantee, then the thing is to, you know, to practice very strongly. So I don't know. Is that okay? Does that make sense? Yeah. So we can use them in that way, actually. That's a perfectly reasonable way to use these, you know, this aspect of the teaching, which we sometimes struggle with as well. Nobody's saying it's especially likely that you're going to be reborn in the hell realm, but you want to be pretty damn sure, you know. Yeah. Okay. So how are we doing? So yeah. So first of all, I'm going to just talk about the reasons for meditating on suffering. And I think it's quite a nice teaching, actually, that he gives, you know. So he quotes from Nagarjuna. Is that from a letter to a friend? I'm not sure. Or maybe it's from the Precious Garland, is it? No, from a letter to a friend. Every day, think about the nature of the hot and cold hells. Think about the realm of the ghosts who are tortured by hunger and thirst. Look at and consider the predicament of the animals who suffer greatly through lack of intelligence. Okay, so this is the, you know.
Could you give us page numbers, please?
All right, okay, page 62. Yeah. So, you know, that's the authoritative scriptural source, if you like, for these teachings. Very direct. Nagarjuna is saying we should meditate on these things. And the first Dalai Lama says, contemplating these worlds daily gives rise to many beneficial effects. For example, the resultant knowledge of the nature of suffering causes our pride and arrogance to decrease. And Shantideva speaks about this. And we experience the thought that it aspires to liberation. That's the main point, you know, is that meditating on these sufferings reinforces that motivation of renunciation. And again, you know, as probably said many times, renunciation doesn't mean, you know, giving up pleasure and wearing a hair shirt and just, you know, going through hardship. It doesn't mean that. It means the motivation to become free from suffering through abandoning the causes of suffering. That's renunciation. Okay. So the more we think about suffering and how we don't want to experience it and continue to experience it, that is what actually gives that motivation of renunciation its power. So Kong, you're talking about, you know, being a Hinayana practitioner. Well, this is the, you know, the key motivation from the Hinayana path, isn't it? Is the intense desire to attain liberation, attain nirvana. Okay. So through realizing the cause of suffering to be negative activity, we experience the thought to transcend negativity. So we have we feel a strong wish to abandon negative actions, non-virtuous actions, abandon any kind of harm to others, etc. And conversely, you know, experience the thought to engage in creative activity, the cause of happiness. Okay, positive actions. And then based on one's own experience of suffering and the inference of how other beings also suffer, one experiences the thought of compassion for all beings. So here, although, you know, we're at this section in the text where it's mainly talking about this first scope motivation, wanting to be able to attain a higher rebirth and avoid a lower rebirth, but he's bringing in the other main reason to meditate on suffering, which is, of course, to generate a mind of compassion. Contemplation of the nature of karma and its fruit also leads to concern with the terrible miseries found in the various realms of samsara, and this in turn gives rise to a strong thought of turning for guidance to the three jewels of refuge, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So, yeah. That's kind of just another aspect of the same thing, really, isn't it? So, you know, we're looking at suffering, meditating on suffering, and we think, I want to be free from suffering. And that, you know, becomes a very powerful force in our mind, not just, oh yeah, I'd like to be free from suffering, you know, but a really kind of intense, wow, I bet I've got to do something about this. This is an urgent problem, you know. That kind of intense motivation. Yeah, I'm going to engage. And then what are we going to do about it? How do I abandon the causes of suffering? And that is through the practice, taking refuge in the three jewels and practicing the Dharma path, right? So they're two sides of the same thing, you know. Yeah, I want to turn away from suffering. In order to turn away from suffering, what do I turn towards? I turn towards the three jewels. So then there's this nice verse from Shantideva, you know, which I remember in the Stephen Batchelor's translation. Suffering has many positive qualities. Through it, arrogance is shunned, compassion arises for those in cyclic existence, sorry, arrogance is dispelled. That's right. Through it, arrogance is dispelled. Compassion arises for those in cyclic existence. Negativity is shunned and joy is found in virtue. So Glenn Mullen's done his own translation, which is almost exactly the same. So yeah, I think that's a great verse, actually. You know, so when we tend to think, oh, I don't want to meditate on suffering, that's not very nice, I'll just do the other meditations. But here Shantideva is pointing to, yeah, actually he's not talking about meditation on suffering, he's talking about actual experience of suffering here. You know, so yes, we want to be free from the causes of suffering, but at the moment we don't have the power to just turn it off. You know, we can't flick a switch and be free from suffering. So when suffering comes, we actually can, in a paradoxical way, we can be quite happy about it. This is what Shantideva is saying, you know. And this is from the chapter on patience. So he's talking about, you know, not getting impatient and frustrated because we're experiencing suffering, because we created the karma for that suffering to occur, right? Whatever it was, whether it's, you know, physical discomfort, pain, illness. He talks about sickness, bondage, and beatings, and all of these things that can happen to us. Instead of getting angry and frustrated about it, we can reflect on the fact that, as he says, suffering has many positive qualities. You know, through it, arrogance is dispelled. Very true. You know, if you're going through a difficult time, a lot of suffering, that kind of ego pride will evaporate. And it's a very dangerous thing, that arrogance, a very dangerous tendency spiritually. Compassion arises for others who suffer in samsara, also very true. If you're going through a really hard time, very easy to generate compassion for other people. If life is soft and easy, it can be quite hard. Negativity is shunned, you know. You don't want to do negative actions. You don't want to create causes for more suffering. Joy is found in virtue. You know, I mean, and that, it's not a sort of just a kind of logical process. Oh dear, you know, I'm experiencing suffering, and the Buddhist teachings say that the cause of suffering is negative actions, so I will stop doing negative actions, and the cause of happiness is positive one, so I'll start doing positive actions. You know, it can happen quite spontaneously. It can be, you know, that sort of suffering kind of bringing down the ego mind can actually act as a cause for one to be spontaneously motivated to do more positive actions and stop doing the negative ones. I just, you know, Shantideva's teachings are so fantastic, so wonderful. Yeah, so more quotes from Shantideva here about when we're really confronted full on with the reality of samsaric suffering, then, you know, and here he's talking about actually as death is approaching. Shantideva gives very graphic descriptions of the state of mind of someone who is about to die. And it's very important when you're reading that text to remember what he's talking about is the state of mind of someone who's approaching death without having done a lot of spiritual practice. You know, they've neglected their spiritual practice and they've, you know, gone on sort of thoughtlessly creating somewhat negative actions. And then the death itself rears up and the prospect of the next rebirth rears up. Even for people that don't believe in rebirth, actually, when they're approaching death, there's tremendous fear and they don't really know why. But the reason is because there's some kind of premonition that can happen of where we're going, you know. So if we die with having our life having been dominated by more negative than positive actions, then there will be great fear at the time of death. And so he's talking about the state, and then at that time, we may cry out desperately for some kind of refuge who can save us. But at that time, it's too late. It's the wrong time to be having that thought. So now is when we need to think about, finding a refuge. So, therefore, I now look for guidance. I purely seek refuge in the Buddhas who protect the world. Strive to shelter all that lives and with great strength eradicate all fear. So that fear of death and fear of the next rebirth and the fear of samsara itself can all be dissolved, dispelled through having real trust and refuge in the three jewels. Okay. If we understand the reality, the actual nature of a Buddha, that they have completely transcended suffering, and the power that they have to, that if we single-mindedly place our trust in the Buddha and in the path that the Buddha has taught, we are completely safe. There's nothing to fear. This is what Shantideva is saying. So therefore, contemplating what might happen next time around if we're not careful, is the way, the doorway into that, I would say, moving from a kind of intellectual belief in the teachings to a real sort of deeply embodied experience of refuge, knowing that, as long as I follow this path, we're not talking about blind faith here, we're talking about based on an understanding of why the Buddha taught the things that he taught. Why is the Noble Eightfold Path, or the whatever we want to call it, 6 paramitas or so on, why are those, practices a way to become free from suffering? If we really understand them, we can see that that's true. But also having that personal trust in the Buddha is very, very powerful. Yeah.
It's me again, is that all right?
Yeah, that's great, Anne. Somebody has to pipe up.
Well, from time to time, there's something I share in these discussions. It's very personal. I hope people don't mind, but I just found it so powerful. I had a cancer diagnosis a while back, and it's a shock, and you have a whole layers and layers and layers of emotions that you process. Now, the bottom line is, the only thing that was negative about that was actually having the diagnosis. Everything else was totally positive. Mm-hmm. The way it focused my mind, the way I saw things so it infinitely clearly, the way I could prioritize differently, the way I felt about my relationship with people, everybody. I think I wasn't an unkind person before, but it changed, and it changed really substantially. And it was a real gift. Yeah. And I personally don't think I could have got that huge spiritual shift without having had that. I think people can, and I think this is one of the reasons I share it. Is you can also, like, I was thinking of you all the time, Izzy, now, because it's not a nice place to be, and certainly to get wrapped up in worrying about things. But I wish you could sort of get yourself into what I had to face, and then sort of see it as a positive. It wasn't a matter of trying to convince, I'm going on here, but it wasn't a matter of trying to convince myself it was a positive. It just was, where it was so real what I realized was basically, I think, whatever's going to happen to my body, I'll do the best I can, you know, whatever. But what it's the mind, and that's what you've got to work with. And therefore my will to work with the mind as much as I possibly could was immense. I haven't got that clarity now. Some of it's left over. But anyway, for what it's worth, I don't want to go on too long. But I hope that might be helpful.
You know, thank you so much, Anne, for sharing that. And I think that's really valuable, really to hear. You know, that's expressed much more eloquently than I could have done about, well, you know, why are we doing, you know, why we do meditation on death is because we haven't been given a terminal diagnosis, you know, we haven't been. So but we have to meditate to recreate that. I think I mentioned it, didn't I, about this book by Stephen Levine called A Year to Live. Did I speak about that last time? Yeah. Because he was working with lots of people who had this and seen this transformation that you spoke about there from your own experience. You know, it's a wake-up call. It really is. It's, can we give ourselves that wake-up call without having to get a terminal illness, you know? Really, you know, so even if it might be a bit scary to think about, it might be worth doing because it may have that effect. So that's really eloquently put it, Anne, as well. And I think also, you know, not only the death awareness meditation, but there's suffering in there, isn't there? And so when I'm talking about, you know, when we go through that sort of purgative fire, if you like, of some really difficult suffering, which might be physical pain, illness, or it might be fear, you know, and that comes with it. But it purifies the mind. If we maintain a positive mind towards it, if we, you know, and endure it with some kind of, you know, not that we never get upset about it, but we don't just sort of drown in self-pity and get furiously angry and things like that, but actually try to face up to what's going on, and to, you know, we do have strength within us to deal with those kind of experiences. And although it's not pleasant, but the results are positive.
The other thing, I've just, as you were saying that, I realized it was the knowing that my mind was all I had to deal with. The other thing was acceptance.
Yes, exactly.
It was a huge thing. And, you know, very early on, after the sort of wham, you know, it was, this is how it is. Right. What do I do about it?
Yeah.
And then what you do about it is you do what you can for your body, but mainly you do what you can for your mind. And that acceptance was huge. And I was thinking of you here as the, you know, it's just accepting that I am going to die. Do you know what? It's going to happen. This is how it is. So what do I do? and that's when you get to the Dharma is the only thing that will help at the time of death, isn't it?
Yeah. So really, we're all in that situation, aren't we? We all have a terminal diagnosis, you know. We've been born, so we're going to die. But we don't kind of relate to it in that kind of way. And so this is thank you again. And, you know, this is a gift that the Dharma is giving us to get that positive, you know, shift in our lives without the doctor having to tell us you've got 6 months to live. You know, that's the skillful means that they're trying to lead us into. Yeah. So, okay. Yes, please. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just saying thanks for sharing, Anne.
Yes. Really absolutely. Yeah. Really valuable. Okay. So yeah, so just sorry.
So relating back to my question I asked, I guess that is the sign that you're meditating on death correctly, that you know that you find it positive rather than
In general, yes. But I mean, I would qualify that a little bit because, you know, you might not get that positive result immediately. It might be a bit disturbing at first. It might even be very disturbing. But then, you know, the important point is underlying it all is this fact that this is how things are. This is reality. So what the Dharma teachings are inviting us, or or pushing us towards, is right. It is reality, and we don't tend to have a realistic relationship with that reality. So, and we need to have one, and so we need to confront it. We need to, as Anne said, you know, it's about acceptance. This is reality. It's not some kind of you know, unfair punishment that's happening to me. It's universal. Everybody has to face this truth that life is finite. We're going to die. Actually, death needn't be a problem, you know, if we do sort of respond to it with using that fact of death to motivate us to deepen our spiritual practice, and we maintain that spiritual practice, then we can face death with perfect equanimity. Death itself isn't a problem, but it's our relationship with it is problematic. So it might be that, you know, at the beginning, yeah, we might experience quite a bit of disturbance. So I think the touchstone, David, is more like, are we keeping in touch with the reality of the truth of how things are, rather than am I having lots of positive experiences with my meditation on death? But I don't advocate, if it is causing you serious disturbance, I don't advocate pushing it at all. But you know, it's more about, because this is the fundamental reality of our lives, we need to confront it, contemplate it, accept it, and develop a positive relationship to it. Okay, so that might take a little bit of time. It might not, you know, sometimes it can be quite immediate. Yes, and again, yeah.
I hope you don't mind.
Not at all.
Something when I was at Copan was said, and it's something in smaller ways I experienced myself. It's not exactly to do with death, it's to do with suffering. Apparently, I'm not sure of the details of this, but when some of the Tibetans were tortured and kept in the, you know, the dreadful things happen. I think there still are.
Yeah.
The more spiritually advanced people there were seeing this as a very positive thing, because they were able then to purify karma, which they didn't have to carry to the next life. And I know that's huge, of course, in their case, but I've had, you know, things happen to me in the last few years which have been really, I'm not talking about my illness now, but other things which have been really very difficult. And because of that information, and because of this thing I got about acceptance, those two together have been such useful tools, because I can see, well, you know, this is karma ripening. Okay, get on with it. Do what you've got to do. Won't have to do this again. You've sorted this now, you know, that's the bank's cleared, you know. And I thought I found it really useful way of dealing with life.
Yes, no, acceptance is extremely important. Yeah. There's a story that Palden Gyatso tells. I don't know if any of you know this. This was a monk who was he was arrested in the uprising, national uprising in 1959 in Tibet, when they thought that the Chinese were trying to kidnap the Dalai Lama, and he was thrown in the prison camp, and he was in the prisons for 33 years. And he was repeatedly tortured. And, you know, he survived longer than anybody else because he had this very, very strong determination. He wanted to survive and escape from the prisons and escape from Tibet to go and tell the world about what was happening. And he actually did that. And I saw him just after he came out of Tibet, and you could see it was quite interesting, because I saw him about 2 years later. So when I first saw him, he'd very recently come out of Tibet, and he was like, you could see the marks of the incredible suffering that he'd been through, and he tells some very amazing stories. The one story that he tells, it's very interesting. He said there's one of the monks. Very often, the Chinese would take people out and execute. They would just announce, "You're going to be executed today." These are people in the prison camp. There were no particular reason. They would just, pick some people and kill them. And there was one of the people in the camp who was this monk who was, he was a quite sort of inspiration to many people, who's going around, sort of really trying to help people and keeping their spirits up and very positive. And then the Chinese announced they were going to execute him, and he was absolutely quivering in terror and pleading with them, they wouldn't do this. He was absolutely terrified of being killed. And then there was another person, who's a lay person, who also I think had been sort of quite a positive figure, and they announced they were going to execute him, and his response was, "Thank you," he said. And he quoted this Tibetan proverb, which says, "It is good to have a long, happy life, but it is better to have a short, unhappy life." That's Tibetan thinking. Because you're purifying all your negative karma, so you're going to go to the Pure Land. And that was his belief. And so he went happily to the execution firing squad, or wherever it was. And when you hear these stories, well, it's real. These are because people who have lived from infancy with this kind of spiritual training as part of their culture. That it's not just something that goes on in the monasteries. It's part of the fabric of life as it was in Tibet. And so he tells many stories, extraordinary stories like this, of the spiritual ways in which people faced and dealt with suffering. So we can see, these teachings have incredible power. And you're so right, that acceptance is really fundamental. We need to accept reality the way that it is. And in a way, that's the Buddha's whole message, actually. Yeah. So thank you very much for, sharing from your personal experience, because I think that's what makes this real. Okay. So I was just finishing off the last portion of the text. I'll just read a little bit more. So he says, we can have no confidence that we will not be reborn in the lower realms. He's talking about the ghost realm specifically, but it applies to the others as well. He said, the cause of such a rebirth, talking about the ghost realms, is the accumulation of negative karmic seeds of mild intensity, and also the seeds of miserliness and attachment, as you said, Anne. We have collected many such seeds in this lifetime alone, not to mention in all the previous lives we've experienced since beginning this time. So that was the end of talking about these three lower realms, okay? And then he says, in summing it up, this is the nature of the sufferings of the three lower realms of samsara. Make every effort to abandon the cause of being reborn in them, which is the collection of negative karma. So we do have this collection of negative karma, we have still the seeds of negative actions in previous lives and even in this life that may not have been fully purified. So we haven't got rid of all the causes that exist in our mental continuum. We may have got rid of the majority. We may not be headed for a lower rebirth next time, but we still haven't, we haven't got that absolute guarantee for the future. So we still need to continue doing this work of abandoning those negative states of mind and negative actions, and reinforcing the positive ones. Strive instead for the cause of higher rebirth, which is the collection of positive karma and goodness. And so this is the foundation, this foundation of ethics, really, moral, positive behavior, on that foundation, only on that foundation, we can build, you know, the deeper spiritual attainments of concentration and wisdom and so on. So then he says, moreover, the supreme goodness is the two bodhicittas, or the enlightenment minds, which is the subject of the next chapter. So apply yourself diligently to cultivating and achieving them. So at this point, you know, yes, the focus is renunciation, becoming free from the causes of a suffering rebirth next time, and in fact becoming free from samsaric suffering altogether. But underlying it, the real motivation, you know, is bodhicitta, is the Mahayana scope of practice. So here, as I said at the beginning, you know, we're laying the foundation. The if you like, the Hinayana motivation is the foundation that we can build the Mahayana on top of. We need that